Okay, guys, so we're talking about It Didn't Start With You. I'm going to share my screen, desktop, share, and I'm excited to have every one of you here. Thank you for joining, whether or not you read the book or you're just here for the conversation. It's going to be enlightening either way. And we have Dr. Jon Mackoff here with us. As you can see, he is an expert in the field of emotional healing, ancestral trauma, mind, body. I'm going to hand the mic over to him in just a sec so he can tell us, he can do some justice there because it's more than that. But we can explore this notion of inherited family trauma by talking about what we've gone over, what we've read in this book. The book itself brings this notion of core language, which we're going to spend some time talking about, into play, and it doesn't. It's not really about. I'm sorry. It's about identifying the trauma that has been unidentified for so long because these things tend to exist in the words that we choose subconsciously. So the past is never dead. It's not even past. William Faulkner, this is a quote that Mark used to open the book, and I thought it was really profound for as few words as it is, because when you think of the past, you kind of feel like you're removed from it. But I think every word in this book goes to show that you actually carry it with you in your everyday, whether it was your experience or not. So, Dr. Mackoff, tell us about you so that the people who are here know who they're working with.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Jon Mackoff. I am a licensed chiropractor for over 25 years. Um, but I got into a lot of different fields of mind, body, uh, muscle testing, frequency testing, energetic testing, various things that along the way, along the years, started to develop different gifts or notice different gifts that I was able to see different patterns within people, within their emotions, within their ancestral, and a lot of it might come up intuitively. Sometimes it also comes up with being able to follow when we talk about their family history and seeing how things line up with what they're presenting with, and things jump out. And so I found that I was able to really dive into this and really help people through their blockages in their life, relationships, health, in all various aspects of what they're drawing towards themselves, what they are finding themselves repeating in their patterns and their lifestyles, the people, and how sometimes they're the people they draw themselves to or that are drawn to them are various replications of patterns of what they grew up with. And so I've followed that sometimes generationally as well. Reading this book gave me some new insight of how to look at it in a few different ways, and we can go into that along the way. But yeah, this is just something that I've gravitated to be able to do, and I enjoy it just because seeing the healing it brings, as well as it's seeing like the real shifts in life that it brings to people is
Yeah,
very cool.
definitely. And when we were speaking on the phone a few weeks ago, I mean, you connected with something for me. It was that natural for you, and you practice in Chicago, but you can work remotely, right?
Yes, I
Okay.
would say over half my people are remote.
Okay. So as we're discussing these concepts tonight and people are connecting dots in their own lives, if they wish to find someone who can help them unpack this even more, it doesn't matter that they're not in Chicago, they could still reach out to you for help.
100%. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes, I was quite impressed with what came up in a few short sentences. I didn't even know think you were going to, so that was a treat.
I didn't know I was going to either.
Oh, see, thanks. Okay, so thank you so much for being here and being something we can lean on as we navigate these really big concepts. And I just appreciate your time so much. Um, okay, so this is this says chapter 1, but the introduction was really cool too. And from the introduction, I just want to point out the concept of seekers versus finders, because when I read that, something clicked for me the first time. And I was in the middle of my healing. Who's not in the middle of a healing journey? Okay, so when you are seeking good health, you're in the mind state of that it is yet to be found. So the mentality of being a seeker versus the mentality of being a finder was a huge light bulb moment for me, and hopefully others too. But it gives you a chance to escape that constant seeking and start. Well, it's preventing you from finding what you seek if you're constantly seeking. So if you can just change your mentality to being a finder instead of a seeker, that's going to equip you better for seeking what you find, finding what you seek. So you don't want to be sick forever. Can you find it instead of constantly seek it? And the author went into this great example of how he was seeking healing for his eye because he was blind in one eye, and he ended up around the world, but all of his gurus and wise teachers kept telling him to go back to his mother and go back to his home and fix things there. And he at first dismissed them as being silly. How could you tell me to go back home? I've come this far to find answers. But really, healing is something that can be inside your heart when you think it's around the world. So I thought it was an inspiring message of hope that he chose to open the book with. And it's really set the tone for what's to come, because so much of so many of the solutions that are offered in this book come from inside ourselves. And I think that's empowering. All right. And then core language approach. So before we get into chapter 1, core language, he describes core language as the crucial role of language in the inherited trauma. So if we start listening to words that we use, then we can start uncovering some of the things that might be hiding within. Things that we might think are normal or that do belong to us in the words that we choose to use might be giving us clues to actually point to things that we're carrying around that don't belong to us. So they expose the trauma, and it can unveil tools and images that are needed to heal. So we really need to start honing in on word choices, patterns, and not even necessarily just words, but like behaviors. And I have a good image of that later. And everybody can have this PowerPoint. I don't want you to feel like you have to write everything down. I can send it for sure. Okay. So chapter 1, traumas, lost and found. Let's see. The idea of traumatic events and the inability to articulate what happened, fragmented images, body sensations, and words can be triggered by anything reminiscent of the original experience. So when we're thinking about trauma, sometimes your brain can't formulate words to program the trauma in your head. And so you end up with these broken pieces, or you end up associating certain body sensations with the trauma, or certain words even. So we end up carrying these things around, and then when we experience them later in life, they can trigger the same response. But this is where we start in identifying where to heal. And I thought it was really interesting that he brought in this quote from Freud, to repeat it until someone gets it right. And that applied across generations. So he's suggesting that, if it happens in one generation and it doesn't get resolved or become right, it's gonna be repeated. You're gonna see it over again in generations to come. And there's so many examples in the book. But I really think that's a neat way to put it, is until it gets its acknowledgement or its resolve, its resolution, then it's going to be repeated, whether that's in your own life or down the line. So how do we know? We start looking at the word choices that are used in our own examples or in our clients. If you work with people, you start looking at the way they talk and seeing what significant words tend to repeat, and it points the arrow. So, and then Carl Jung, he also brought into awareness here by echoing what Freud said, and I'm pretty sure he said that they studied together, right? I think he mentioned that. Anyways, core language is what we're going to use to uncover these these ideas. Let me see here. I wanted to bring up his example of the Holocaust here because he talked about post-traumatic stress disorder and how that can impact generations later down the line. So I actually, is anybody brave enough to define PTSD? Because I mean, I have a general understanding of it. I could have Googled it, but I wanted to save it for the conversation. So post-traumatic stress disorder, is it a physical thing? Like, does anybody want to go for it? Let's go.
Well, there's a couple things. Uh, First, I want to touch on the inability to articulate what happened.
Yes.
Um, Anything from early childhood before a child can really grasp concepts is going to be an inability to articulate what happened a lot of times. So then anything before that, which can be in utero, because when you're in utero and the mother doesn't deal with her emotional stuff, she suppresses it into the womb where the baby is, and the baby sometimes picks up some of that. So again, another generational. And then before that, it's hard to articulate because it didn't come from an event that the baby or you originate with. Now, PTSD is something, a traumatic experience that gets relived after the original trauma through some triggers. And those triggers can be a variety of triggers. Those triggers can be a word, it can be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be a situation of certain people, it could be a date. So, there can be things that are repetitive, but it depends on the person. It can be easily triggered and repeated from a traumatic state that brings the person back into that original trauma. And so they start to have some of the original feelings that
Mm.
they did in that traumatic event, if that makes sense.
Physical, like physically feeling as if they're going through it.
They can physically feel
Wow.
some of the effects. They can physically or mentally, like if you really think about like soldiers and also abuses and sexual abuses, whatever, it can put them back in that state of trauma from where it originated, and they don't know where they are currently and react from that original trauma. So, which can be a different reaction than the original reaction, but it can be totally disassociated. So,
So when people throw that term around these days, I'll have PTSD from that, like almost jokingly. It's not just about being a little scarred from something and now you are a little bit afraid. It's more visceral. People are really feeling something going through it again, and it's hard to get out of.
it's very visceral,
Yeah.
but I would say it could go on a gradient.
Okay.
Meaning, like if someone says a word that keeps triggering somebody into those same, and they don't know where it's coming from, it can be, a reaction to a trauma that they don't fully remember.
Okay.
And it just gives them a very unsafe feeling or a very triggered feeling, and they don't know where it's coming from. And it brings them out of the present. So I would say there could be a little gradient, but what we think of PTSD is more significant trauma
Mhm.
reaction.
Awesome. I mean, not awesome, but
But
thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, I know what you mean.
I totally, yeah, I appreciate that. The way he brought PTSD into chapter one was in regards to Holocaust survivors,
Hmm.
how their cortisol levels had dropped, and so had the cortisol levels of their children, even though the children had not experienced the Holocaust.
Yeah. So I would
So,
even say when I say about PTSD being on a gradient, I would say the more significant the trauma, the more likely it's going to pass down
mm,
generationally.
mm, okay. And this is you
Because that's a
mentioned
survival technique.
it's a
You
survival.
know, as he talks about, I believe he talked about, um, if not, well, I'll talk about.
Yes,
But it's like when they talked about the mice through the different
yes.
generations, and it's like, okay, if I forget what the thing with the mice was, but if something was poison and it had a scent to it,
Mhm.
then down generations for the generations to survive, they should be afraid of that scent because keeps them away from the poison for survival. So some of the things that get passed down, if it's a grand uh, program,
Mhm.
a universal program for species to survive, there is a little bit of that trauma that passes down to help survive, except usually a lot of generations aren't in the same predicament as the
Right.
generation before.
Right. In which case, I can imagine it becomes hard to figure out where that trauma response is even coming from. So if the predicament is different, it's not obvious. Like, for example, I wasn't in the Holocaust. Why am I having this traumatic experience? And then you find, I mean, there are a few examples like this one here, chapter one, Gretchen. She, if you guys read it, this one probably stood out to you because she said she wanted to vaporize herself. Like who uses, I've never heard of that. And
Yeah.
that was specific to her. She wanted to incinerate and vaporize herself. And so being out of that predicament, she was not a survivor of the Holocaust. However, her grandmother's family was, right? And so she's having exactly what you just described happen through her epigenetically. It passed down, and something. Is it your opinion that maybe something triggered this response in her, like like some type of PTSD trigger, made her want to think these things?
I would say not knowing Gretchen personally,
Yeah.
but she's also, as he talked about, and I don't know if he talked about it with her or somebody else as well, she's taking on I don't want to say persona, but of the killer and the victim at the same time. You
Interesting.
know, she's going to be vaporized as well as do the vaporizing. Not, it's like she's
Mhm.
taking on both roles, that
Mhm.
both roles have not been healed, as well as the author talks about when we talk about the family tree of sorts,
Mhm.
it's also everybody who interacted. So if someone did the abuse, they are now part of that family tree. If
Right.
someone, is married in and they're part of that family tree, it's like, so since they're part of that family, she's taken on both roles of those traumas
Right.
and not knowing why. And what triggers it, I would say, and this is just a supposition of sorts, because in healing, your body can't heal when it's in crisis. Your body and mind can't heal when it's in crisis. So, and certain genes that are favorable in traumas will get suppressed, and certain genes that are unfavorable may get turned on by certain triggers. So if for some reason she grew up not feeling safe for some reason,
Yeah.
through neglect, through abuse,
Mhm.
through criticism, whatever, that already starts a self-criticism, self-loathing, possibly self-esteem issues. And that may allow that now epigenetic trauma to start to slowly show itself.
And then, like you mentioned earlier, you said dates when you were saying things that can bring
Hmm.
these responses to light. So she hits a certain age, maybe it's some type of empathetic epigenetic response where this was the age
100%.
grandma was, and now it's heightened or
It can be an age, it can be a situation.
mm,
It's like if somebody was shamed in a group in
mhm,
a claustrophobic space, and then you're talking in a group, and then it sort of feels a claustrophobic space, and it has a bigger response than you would think it did. That could be that type of trigger.
mm,
So it's how
mm,
how does your mind emulate the metaphor of what, because you can see things in metaphors, you can experience life in metaphors. So, however that metaphor translates into your genetic code or epigenetics, it may trigger one of those ancestral
right.
traumas.
Yeah, that's the other one on the screen, Jesse. That example, he was relating to his uncle that had frozen to death 30 years before, and he had never known this uncle, but Jesse woke up with the blankets off of him and he was freezing. It was the same age as his uncle who died from hypothermia, changing power lines or something in the snow. And he had that like that environmental, it mimicked what his uncle went through. And maybe it's the being at the right place at the right time and it just all came together. Or maybe I mean, I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg there, but it did, he was in a cold environment at the same age, and then he felt like he was afraid to go back to sleep because he would never wake up. So seems like an empathy situation, but also a triggered, like we go back to that Freud quote where it's going to repeat until we get it
Mhm.
right. So, and another big factor in both of these examples, and you can talk to this if you want, Dr. Mackoff, is that neither one of them, neither one of their families spoke about these incidents. So they were suppressed in family history. They were things
Mhm.
that were never talked about. I don't think either one of them even knew about the other, like the traumas until they started working with somebody to figure it out. So I guess if it's suppressed, does that mean it has a stronger, is it trying to come out more strongly than things that have been talked about?
I think I don't know if it comes out more strongly, but it makes things more difficult.
Okay.
And there's a thing within quantum neurology where I did the guy who developed it, he talks about your body can't heal what it can't see.
Mm.
And there's a lot of different ways of seeing. So
Mhm.
things that are talked about have an awareness to it. And so if you have an awareness to it, it doesn't necessarily have a lack of connection. So that if you're able to have an awareness and connect to it, sometimes that in itself helps resolve some of those issues, or you put together along the way and it's not as impactful. But when you're not aware of it, it just tends to build up because your body and your mind don't know
Mhm.
what to do with this information. They don't know how to heal it. So, which makes it even more impactful because now I have something and I don't know what it is. So I'll give a little example of this. And this is not necessarily generational, but it is how the body sometimes reacts to emotional, either trauma or emotional things that aren't being recognized or dealt with. I did a trip on one birthday for a AIM solar return sort of trip, which is, yeah, each birthday is a solar return. AIM solar return is when you really want to shift something in your life that's not going well, and talk to a astrology lady in Italy who found where I should be, gave me some options to be for the shift for this birthday. And so I went to the Atacama Desert. Well, I went to Santiago, and then went to the Atacama Desert that I heard about. That was supposedly a healing desert. And while I was there, met some people, did some hikes, healed some people. Uh, and on the last day, I picked a spa thing to do. And there was a Peruvian mud wrap, chocolate wrap scrub thing to do. And so I was like, that's not normally what I would do, but it tested, so I did it. And so they did a scrub. She walks out of the room, shower, put on a new one size fits all underwear, and then she does the mud scrub, and then she wraps you like a burrito and walks out. And during that scrub and like before being wrapped, I just started like shivering and shaking. She's like, "You cold?" I'm like, "No." So when she left the room, I like went inside, internal. I did a little internal journey and try to figure out where this shivering was coming from. And I figured out that, again, before I went back home, that I consistently had a hard time saying no. I kept letting my boundaries go, which then I was resentful for letting the people asking for my boundaries to be gone versus realizing it's my boundaries to hold, and that I could own my no, and did that. And once I realized it, the shivering stopped right on the spot. And then I was able to just relax and do the whole rest of the wrapping or whatever. Um, and it was that thing of awareness. Once I was able to pull my awareness to what was actually causing that symptom, my body was able to then deal with it because it now knew what was
Mm.
disrupting. So sometimes with these things, if we already have an awareness of some of these connections and to a certain degree, then I don't think some of these symptoms show up as much. But when they don't, why they align with certain people in the family and not others, it's hard to say whether it's just a um, universal lesson for that person to graduate them to wherever they're supposed to transform to. It's hard to say, but yeah, it's like, but if your body can't figure out why it's feeling a certain way, those feelings stay. Whether the physical symptoms, mental, emotional symptoms go into anxiety, and some of the anxiety I treat is because they can't figure out what's causing a certain feeling. So once we
And you
figure it
can,
out, a lot of their things, what?
you can help people figure it out, right? Like what is,
If they're ready for it.
if they're
Some
ready for it.
people, some people aren't ready, and if they're not ready, then I'm not the right person for them until they are ready,
Right.
because they have to be ready to see certain things. They have to sometimes be ready to confront certain things. They
Mhm.
have to sometimes be ready to give up a type of identity that they might have of themselves, or see
Mm.
something in their parents like, oh, I don't want to be a bad person, so I don't want to see this about them. But you first have to heal first before you forgive,
Mhm.
sometimes. And yeah.
Because I think some people who are new to the idea might ask, well, how do you just go inside yourself and know, oh, it's my boundaries? That's the problem, right? Like, how,
Yeah.
I'm sure some people will wonder, well, how could I do that for myself? How do I know what the answer is if I go on my own internal journey, which is really powerful to be able to do.
Yeah. I don't know a lot of people who can do it. I know some, so it's not like impossible, but there is like a development of self-awareness. There is a development of really being willing to see things. There is a training of certain muscles, I would say, of like, energetic muscles of mind, mental, emotional muscles, because you have to allow information to come. You
Okay.
have to allow some of your intuition to help guide you.
Mhm,
And if you
mhm.
shut your intuition off, which a lot of people do, or you were trained to ignore it, which a lot of people are done by their parents and family, um, it's harder. So it's and I have a lot of colleagues that I know that aren't able to. So it's not like you have to have a license to. It's just that and I think there's certain people I could probably train to, but they also have to be at a certain point that they are uh, willing to surrender to, and a lot of people need to be in control.
Yes.
So
So, would it be an appropriate suggestion then for someone who wants to start exploring that, who is willing and open, for them to practice being in the quiet and just seeing the images that might come up, no matter
I
how
would say,
random?
well, I would say being in the quiet is a great thing, and breathing. Then to start to pay attention to their body, because you want to not run away from what your body's feeling. You want to be able to take in that information and with no judgment. You don't want to judge what things are. You don't want to just try to predict what things are. You just want to just notice. And I would say that in itself is a great start.
I love that. I mean, if you're open to it, the sky's the limit. I mean, we can do so much in our own mind if we try. I have been a very logical person my whole life, and in the past couple years, I've allowed myself to try to control less. And there are so many beneficial things that have come into my head. It's hard to explain with words because it's more like conceptual. But it's freeing to connect dots and to feel like you're hearing answers and see
Well,
that interchangeably, right? Like you hear
there, there's that, as well as if you are stuck in certain layers of fight or flight,
answers.
um, or freeze, you can't get into your creativity. It's harder to get into your intuition. So as you heal through some of those layers, it makes it more likely, more possible, and so it is, there takes some work to do, but you
Right.
can first try to first tune into your body and see what you're feeling and where the tension is and where uh, something that you can't define is, but it's there. It's starting to just bring awareness to things.
Bringing awareness. Exactly. That's fun. Thank you. Thanks for that
Mhm.
tangent. That was cool. Um, this is another really neat concept I'm sure you have a lot to say about, but biologically, and this is for the people who are kind of stuck on the rational side of the argument. Biologically speaking, the precursor cell of the egg you developed from was already present in your mother's ovaries when your grandmother was 5 months pregnant with your mother. So this is grandma's body, and there's mom, the baby, and then there's you, the black dot. So, and then also, I mean, this goes for sperm too. The precursor cell of the sperm you developed from was present in your father when he was a fetus. So, this is a biological explanation of how the emotions that our grandparents experienced, even during pregnancy, but carried throughout life, impact who we are as human beings, as physical bodies. And yeah, like it says, we're shaped from the moment of conception, biologically, emotionally, and psychologically. And I've heard cases where people who've had multiple children will go, oh, there was this one child I have, the pregnancy was so different than the others. And I can't help but think, does it have to do with the emotional part, the emotional factor, like, like how come you can have four kids and then there was maybe the third pregnancy was different, or she was angrier, or so we get into this whole concept of the family body and why certain children that are siblings experience life differently, even though they have the same upbringing and the same situations, the same exposures. And let's see. So he brings Bruce Lipton into the picture here, who's famous for his research on the environmental impact of gene activation. And Lipton explains that the cellular memory is transferred in the womb. So the fear in the mother pre-programs sympathetic, fight or flight elevation in the fetus before it's born, which increases cortisol exposure in utero, and that can lead to impaired cognitive development. And I wanted to read this little snip from page 28. That was really helpful if you guys want to. I mean, with the knowledge that emotions can be biologically communicated, and the fact that three generations share the same biological environment in the womb. So we go back this one. So three generations share the same biological environment of the womb. Imagine this scenario. A month before your mother is born, your grandmother receives the devastating news that her husband has been killed in an accident. With a new baby to prepare for and little space to grieve the loss, your grandmother would likely submerge her emotions into the body, right? Because she's occupied with being pregnant and probably has other kids. Your grandmother would likely submerge her emotions into the body she now shares with her daughter and grandchild, the little black dot. You and your mother would know something about that grief from a place deep inside of you, a place all three of you share. So that's just a good example of how something can physically happen to this body and then be carried through, and why it's carried through for three generations, because what they experience when they're pregnant affects the child and the grandchild. So that's pretty neat.
Well, even think about 6 generations.
What's your take?
That grandmother's grandmother,
Yeah,
all her emotion stuff goes into the grandmother, who then goes
yeah,
into the granddaughter or grandson or whatever. So it's like there is chain reaction. It doesn't necessarily stop. It's
it
just
doesn't.
that was what was
Right,
researched. But you have to
right.
realize that it could go further.
It could. And so what is the typical, how many years would that be, six generations? So typically we have the three living at the same
Mhm.
time. Are we talking like ancient history? Let's see, if we go back, would that be like the Civil War? Not
I
even
mean,
quite.
I don't, again, I don't limit it because I've found things going through many generations uh
Okay,
back. I just follow where it starts versus worry about, well, science says it only goes this far versus, well, my concern is getting this person better, and I'm going to find where I find it starts and clear it. So um so yeah, but what science has measured, that his one is 3 generations due to the grandmother, which is all correct. There's another one that goes 6 generations through mice, and they didn't study beyond that. Um, I see it go way more.
that's
Um,
so interesting.
so I mean, and when I say way more, it means it can go way more. It doesn't mean each one does go way more. It's just you don't shut off your sight just because that's where they tell you as far to look,
Right,
you
right.
know.
There's not an expiration date.
No.
Um, so the notion of epigenetics simply means heritable changes in gene function that occur without a change in the sequence of the DNA. So, and we were talking about this on the live. You brought up 98% of our genome is the type of DNA that is not telling us our eye color or our hair color. It's the type of DNA that is affected by stress and your environment. 98%. That's pretty much all your genetics. So what grandma or great grandma experiences is going to play a huge role in your DNA because it's not the chromosomal kind, which is 2% of the genome. Stress changes your DNA. Generational trauma. Right. So the epigenetics tags either they work by activating or silencing a specific gene. Dr. Mackoff, do you think all this talk about MTHFR, do you think that this topic has a role in the awareness around that? It's a hot topic and it seems to be prevalent today. But do you think it's always been a problem, or do you think that maybe there's like I start thinking about these common gene deficiencies, and as I was reading this book, I just wondered if there's an epigenetic link in that, and are we
I
doomed for that?
well, I would say if you like listen to Bruce Lipton, you know,
Yeah.
even it's like if you change your perspective, there's Joe Dispenza who goes, if you change your perspective, you can change your life. Bruce Lipton goes, if you change your perspective, you can change your genes. Um, and so can doing some of this deeper emotional generational trauma healing possibly shift those genes and genetic SNPs? I think so. Um, but the genetic SNPs can be triggered through methylation issues from grandmother to mother to fetus. They can be triggered through chemicals. So whether those chemicals are like pesticides, herbicides, injected medical stuff, medications, um, fake foods, that's trauma in itself, and that could trigger some of that. Emotional and physical trauma can do that. Nutritional deficiencies can do that. And some of those nutritional deficiencies can come from infections from the mother to the child, or possibly even father, like sperm wise to the child. But those infections, like parasites, they feed off of the minerals. So that can cause a mineral deficiency, which then can lead to
Right.
certain triggers. So I mean, I do think that the epigenetic and generational trauma is an overlooked aspect of what can trigger and heal some of the genetic SNPs. But there are those other factors that, whether you have the generational trauma or not,
Right.
can still affect. So,
That's interesting. It kind of sends my brain on a spiral to think, well, you mentioned fake foods and environmental pesticides, things like that in our environment that we see more of in 2025 than any human demographic has ever seen before. And then my mind goes to the future. Well, what are our children's children looking at? And how do
yeah.
we hijack that?
Well, especially, I mean, you bring in EMFs to that as well because they keep making stronger and stronger EMFs uh,
Yes,
and
yes.
more widespread. And now you have electric cars where you're sitting in the middle of a battery and you're doing that to the kids that you bring along. And so, yeah, so those are also different triggers for these genetic SNPs.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Yes. I do want to point out something hopeful that was in the book is that he noted that trauma can be reversed after living, and back to what you said about Dr. Joe Dispenza, trauma can be reversed after living positive, low stress life as adults, right? Really visualizing, really putting the work in true low stress. And when you do that, you're changing your DNA methylation, which hijacks the transmission to the next generation.
I mean, if we're talking about the person doing the work,
Yes.
in the post-trauma versus he also mentioned a part where having the child grow up with more support and whatever, but it doesn't talk about the trauma actually being dealt with. It's just that the next generation is given support, given validation, giving all that. And he says the trauma doesn't show up if they're given that as much. He says something like that. I believe that to be true, but I think if you take someone who didn't have that trauma and someone who generationally had the trauma, but they were given a better support system growing up than the previous generations, that one may not have the trigger as much. But if they really do get triggered, they're more likely to have a fragility than the person who just didn't, their generations didn't have that trigger. I think there's still a fragility potential for that lineage that didn't really address the trauma.
Okay, that's
Does that
interesting.
make sense? It's like
Yeah.
if you actually address it and come to an awareness and actually do the healing of that,
Mhm, mhm.
then I think 100% that could really clear the generations going downward. But if
Okay.
you just give them the support that the generations before wanted and make them feel safe, it's going to help them. But I think there's still a potential because I think there is that still strand. If you almost think of that strand through the
Mhm.
generations that was not addressed, and it has a fragility that is more likely to get triggered than someone else who never had that trauma through their family generations.
Right. So if it had been suppressed, so to speak, or unacknowledged.
Yes,
Okay. Like, so
yes.
he uses the example of the Native Americans, and their experience with youth suicide. And do you think maybe that there's some suppression there causing more fragility, um, allowing,
Oh,
you know,
there's so much there. I
support?
mean,
Yeah.
if you just look at the because sometimes I work with patients and we go back certain generations and I'm like, where was your family? And and they went through Armenian genocide, or you go through like the Great Potato Famine, or you go through all these different things. And if you think of the Native Americans, besides, I mean, not saying they didn't fight against each other, but to
Yeah.
have these visitors come in and, you know, wipe out, and not only wipe out, but try to wipe out their culture and wipe out and make them feel bad about themselves and their culture, um, and their religion or how they practice their spirituality. There's so much layers of trauma versus even, and that's like on a whole for that race and culture of people, let alone the individual families
Right.
within the people. So it's so, I don't think this might be the right word, but so rich in trauma. There's a lot to address with there, and so it's not surprising of that suicide rate,
Right.
um, because they were not even allowed to acknowledge, I think. To survive, they couldn't fully acknowledge, um, as well as when you hold on to a victim uh, perception of self, you don't let yourself heal
Mhm.
because then you have to stay in a victim to keep an identity of a victim. And so if you want to stay a victim, then healing's not an option.
Wow, yeah, that's profound. So what do you do with somebody who wants to stay a victim? How do you even start that conversation? Do you go
Well,
generationally back and say, well, look, this is where these feelings are coming from, or
it's like, okay, you have to have that conversation in a certain way. It's like, is your priority healing or is your priority blaming somebody?
hmm,
Right? So if you want to make your priority about blaming, that's blocking off your opportunity to heal. And it doesn't mean that someone didn't have a role in a trauma that you experienced,
right?
but is it more important for you to feel healthy, for you to heal, to have a better life? Or is it more important for you to hold on to the blame and stay in that role? And if they're unwilling to, you can't force somebody to heal. So
I know, darn it.
yeah,
You
well, I
just,
mean, and that's why I do discovery consultation calls with all
oh
potential
yeah,
people to make sure they're ready, willing, able, eager to go into healing, that they're on board. But if they wanna, if they need to be right versus need to be well, um, I'm not the person for them, and they might not be ready for healing. If they need to blame versus get well,
right,
which doesn't mean we can't address things that people have done to them, but it goes into priorities. And some people just aren't ready yet. They're not ready to make that leap, which is fine. There's no judgment on it. It's just, you know, if you don't get out of crisis, then you don't heal. And if
exactly.
they want to stay in the crisis, they won't heal.
And that being said, you can do a lot for yourself if your parents or grandparents are some of those people who do want to stay in crisis and don't want to be healed. I love the message in the book that you don't have to go to those type of people and try to rationalize with them to make it right between both of you. That it's really held in how you hold them in your heart and your mind. You can do all the healing yourself.
Right. So another way, it's like to get closure, you don't need to do it in person,
Exactly.
which is awesome.
It's true forgiveness. I mean, because it doesn't matter if they receive it or not, it's really how you perceive it.
100%.
So, for anybody out there struggling, parental or, children relationships, um, you are empowered to hold it differently and see some big changes from that. I I think this idea is great right now. What my mother didn't get from her mother affected what she was able to give to me and my siblings. Um, and we all have different family dynamics, and I think this book is attracts people who are seeking answers and having trouble ironing out those family dynamics. So when you start to see things in this light of, like you said, we can start putting language with things like, does this person want to consistently be sick? Does this person not want to heal? Do they need to be a victim? Do they want to blame? Um, it, it comes from somewhere and it's not your problem to solve. And once you can accept that, you can start changing your own perspective. So, um, you have to consider these things. And it's all, I love this entanglement theory that he brought up. And we're basically unconsciously carrying the feelings, symptoms, behaviors, or hardships of an earlier member in your family as if they were your own. So, and yeah, and within that, you have why certain siblings are different than other siblings, well, because they're inheriting different traumas from the family tree from different directions. Another note is that the concept of turning the ghosts into ancestors. So taking them out of where they are now and putting them into the past through the power of visualization and images. And do you use visualization a lot in your practice, Dr. Mackoff?
I use it a lot
Okay.
I muscle test and frequency testing. So when it tests that test, or when I get an intuitive hit to do visualizations, I do it.
And do
Sometimes I
you,
do.
do you guide them or how do people,
Depends
how,
on the person. It depends on
okay,
the person because um, some people need a little guidance.
okay.
Some people need a lot of guidance. Some people you can give them a concept
Mhm.
and they've done enough other training that they can go with it, and I can nudge it a little long. So it depends. And some people have an extremely hard time with visualization, and usually that's due to something else. And so that's not the way we do things with them. Um, find another way. And there's always another way.
Is that the type of person who has fight or flight? Uh,
Usually,
oh, okay,
or there's certain traumas that they don't really want to see.
okay,
Um, and or environments they grew up in they don't really want to see.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and sometimes there's things of themselves, and I would say perceived things of themselves
Mhm.
they don't want to see because usually it's not what they perceive, but they have a possibly dark vision of themselves that it's not true. So they don't want to take that internal look. And so it can be a few different things.
Okay. Once you start the visualization process, you can start rewiring your brain. This is where healing starts, right? Because new neural pathways are being formed when you can start envisioning it. And this is Joe Dispenza stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This is real and it's in yourself. You don't have to go somewhere. But the reason that works biologically is, as he said, the inner experience of well-being, which comes from that visualization. If you can envision or stimulate that feeling within yourself, it starts to compete with the old trauma reactions. So it's actually taking your attention out of like the trauma response centers of the brain and bringing it to the prefrontal cortex. And then your brain can start rewiring basically. Um, and it's kind of like you jump in there and break the pattern, right?
Break the pattern, sometimes rewrite the pattern.
Rewrite. Okay.
So sometimes,
I mean, yeah, let's do that. I mean, you can't take a supplement for that.
no.
Not even methylene blue is going to do that, you know? Okay. This was I wanted to make you already brought this up. Thank you. The family web includes people who are part of your family story that aren't necessarily your relatives. So these are some heavy terms down here, but they need to be included when you're considering family trauma. The stillborn baby, the aborted baby, they accidentally killed. I put that in there because there was an example of like the dad accidentally ran over the neighbor kid playing in the driveway one day. Like that's trauma that is woven into your family web, and that little kid needs to be acknowledged too. And so that need to be acknowledged comes up again. And previous partners was interesting. So, girlfriends, boyfriends, and then the half sister that maybe you didn't know so well. All of these people are part of our family web. And so I mean, do you see that a lot, Dr. Mackoff? Or is that just kind of like oh, well, we've explored everything. Maybe we should explore these.
No, it really is
Okay.
um, prevalent. I mean, I had someone today, ex-Jehovah's Witness, abuser or whatever, and their family and had to go into that family to heal a certain thing with him.
Wow.
And and it was a big shift once we actually went outside of his family and also what he may have been pulling in of theirs. Um, so yeah, I wouldn't say it's all the time,
Okay.
but it's enough to keep an awareness about.
That's amazing. Yeah, and that really broadens the scope too, which kind of might seem a little overwhelming, but if you're working with someone like you who can help guide, it's helpful. All right, core language approach. So, what is core language? It's the verbal expression of unresolved traumas. And we use it all the time and we don't even know what we're saying, right? We don't even realize that we're saying something that grandma wants us to say, or, anybody in our web. Core language can also be instead of just the verbal expression, it can be physical sensations, like our guy who woke up shivering. Um, and then behaviors, emotions, impulses, and symptoms of an illness. And core language sounds like emotionally charged words. So remember that example of Gretchen who wanted to vaporize, be incinerated. It's slightly emotionally charged, right? That's very specific. It stands out. And they're used to describe your deepest fears. Yep, and I have them right there. So in your own life, you can ask yourself if there's a word or a phrase that's repeatedly presented in your mind that may help you find your core language. Do you agree that that's a good way for people to start?
I mean, I think if we actually pay attention, it's a great way to start. It's
Mhm.
you know, hearing some people say certain things that give you a charge to it.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, again, it's a little bit allowing your intuition
Mhm.
to take in information and let you be aware of it. You know, I mean, I sometimes I have people just talking and certain words will just stand out.
Yeah,
You know, certain phrases will just stand out. It's like, oh, there, that's it. You
that's
know,
it.
let's see where that goes.
Right,
So
right. Well, he said they're the breadcrumbs on the path. It like you just said, let's see where that goes. So you follow
yeah,
the breadcrumbs. It leads us to the destination through the forest of our deepest fears. So we like try to suppress these things with mindless activities, alcohol, all the things that we turn to that are easy instead of facing things. So once you start noticing the words that you're using, like here's some common ones. I'm never good enough. Like a lot of people say that and feel that way. That's a common one. And then these are from our examples earlier, but I'm afraid I'm never going to wake up, or I want to be vaporized. But it brings us to this notion of declarative and non-declarative. I love this part. It makes so much sense. Declarative is the ability to consciously recall facts or events. Non-declarative operates without conscious recall. So a declarative example would be like you're going inside your brain and you're pulling a book off the shelf and you're reading it word for word. Non-declarative is like, I know how to ride a bike. I don't think about how every step I'm doing, executing during the bike ride. But he suggested that we tend to experience traumatic events in a non-declarative way because of our nervous system, and then it becomes stored in our memory without words. It becomes stored with feelings or fragmented images like we were talking about earlier. So when we can start to change the trauma into something declarative, then we can start to acknowledge it, and we turn a story from undeclared to declared, we can start making sense out of lifelong trauma, because that's how our brains work, right? Like we need the words to be able to acknowledge it. Otherwise, it's just existing as an idea back there that we can't, um, that we keep inviting into the present, even though it's should be in the past. We just haven't acknowledged it. It's a good concept. I like it. You guys like it?
it's like your memory takes a photo of a multi-sensory photo
Nice.
of whatever happened. So that's also why sometimes certain food sensitivities can be from a trauma.
Oh my God.
Because if you had a trauma when certain foods were present,
Yeah.
that can lead to some reaction to that food down the road because your body took a photo of that being included as part of the trauma.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes, so yeah,
So working on the trauma can actually
sometimes,
take care of a food system.
sometimes, yes.
Sometimes, yeah. That's cool. That is amazing. See, you got to be willing to do work outside the box. The four unconscious themes of chapter 5, they're important because they hinder our ability to flourish, they limit our vitality, they show up in our relationships, and they appear in our words. Basically, they interrupt life's forward progress. And here are the four unconscious themes that we walk through life with. Many of us have one or a few of these um, that we walk through life with. Number one, we've merged with a parent. In other words, we subconsciously take on their pain. Number two, we have rejected a parent. In other words, cut off a parent from our life. We judge them. Maybe they're not cut out of our life, but we judge them or we blame them. And number three, we experienced this theme is probably the most talked about in the book, experiencing a break in the early bond with our mother. And I'd love to know more your thoughts on this, Dr. Mackoff, because it seems really important. And I have some questions on that about today's motherhood. but that can be physical or energetic. And the reason it's so important is because it's perceived as a separation from life itself. When you're an infant, your mother is life. So if there's a break in that bond, it's a serious nervous system response. And then the last one is we've identified with a member of our family system other than our parents. So maybe you realize that you have one or two or maybe even three of these going on in the background of your life, but bringing awareness to them, realizing that, oh, maybe I did take on mom's pain when dad left her, or oh, maybe I did take on, when my dad lost his dad, like I saw him sad and I took that on, maybe if you can start to ask yourself these questions, you can go deeper into what could be running in the background. Um, but let's talk more about a break in the early bond with the mother. Why is that one so important, Dr. John?
Uh, there's quite a few reasons because you have to also think about that being a break with the feeling of safety.
Yes.
That's a break with the feeling of being nourished and the worthiness and deservingness of being nourished. I mean, these are some fundamental basic needs that we're being broken from. There's also a break in attunement, which is again getting our needs met, someone seeing us, tuning to us, and knowing what our needs are and be willing to meet those needs and seeing that you're seen and valued and lovable and nurtured, and that you're worthy of being nurtured and nourished. These are a lot of fundamental things that then the child doesn't know if they are deserving of, if they're worthy of, and that also that need to uh, protect oneself, but at the same time cling on to that type of uh, attunement and that hope for love, that hope for connection, because that's also a breaking ability to connect. So and everything in life is a connection. So is a huge wound, which also leads to people pleasing, which also leads to uh feeling vulnerable in a way that is more like feeling unsafe, not just being able to be vulnerable, but never really feeling safe and
Mhm.
never safe to be yourself authentically. Because when you're a baby or child and you have that separation, you're like, oh, I have to get it back. So then you start to try to be who you think they want you to be. So again, that distance you from authenticity. So there's so much trauma layered in that early bond.
What does
Uh,
it look like when they are breaking from them? Does it mean mom has to go on a cross-country adventure and you feel separate, or can it be something more simple?
it can be a lot of things. As they brought up before, uh, it can be child being in an incubator when they like are born, so they don't have that skin to skin touch and connection right off the bat. Adoption, emotionally distant. If the mother goes through some postpartum depression and they can't really hold the child without feeling angry or feeling unstable, and so or maybe they have an injury,
Mhm.
and so they can't lift the child, and so then maybe the father has to pick up more of the slack, or older sibling or nobody or babysitter or grandparent. So there's a more and more distancing from that mother. And they brought up a really great example in like the mother going on a trip, and then the child comes and she comes back and the child is distant, and she puts a spin on it. Oh, they're just getting more independent. And versus like, oh
Mhm.
no, I wasn't there for them. And again, it doesn't mean the parent shouldn't go on a trip, but it's like there is some repair to do afterwards. And so it's not to blame the mother for going on a trip,
Right.
but she put a spin on it of, oh, this child's growing up,
Mhm.
versus oh, I broke a bond that they weren't ready for.
Right.
I have to do some repairing of that bond, which sometimes goes with uh, dealing with some of their feelings, their big feelings, and validating them. So it can, and it also even shows up with hair pulling,
Mhm.
nervous tics,
Mhm.
because the child doesn't know what to do with that extra stress of not feeling that bond. So I mean, there's a variety of, it can be like some eating issues, stomach upset, there can
Mhm.
be. Uh, so there's a bunch of things.
And today, with cell phones, you see moms holding their baby in one hand and looking at the phone.
Yeah,
You
that's
think
another
that
disconnect.
is that a huge contributor to bond breaking?
I would say nowadays it's like a white noise. It's so common that they don't think it's a disconnect.
Yeah,
But it's also like, driving and having the kid watch videos in the back,
yeah,
um, and not telling them not to, but at the same point, it's having a false parent, an electronic parent.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so the kid is now responding to electronics
right,
as well as wiring their brain differently.
right.
So there's
Gosh,
a lot of that, and
right.
even you know having them in a bouncy thing, um, while they like go off and just do whatever. And again, it doesn't need 24/7 attunement, but there has to be that quality time
Right. Or else
to
they
respond.
could spiral into all those things you were describing, even hair
Yeah,
pulling, which he goes into. Um, yeah, that the break in the early bond seems to stand out, especially today with the way that we can offer so many substitutes. I just wonder how are we going to see that starting to manifest in these generations of children who have grown up with mom, with the phone in between mom and the baby, like they see
yeah.
mom as this. It's like, we gotta work.
Well, and realize some of the baby's emotional development and brain development, it takes cues from
Yes,
the mother's facial expressions.
yes.
And when it doesn't have that mirroring effect,
Mm,
it loses something in its development, and it
right.
loses something in its ability to calm itself. So,
Yeah. So and now you've got me thinking back to 2020 where everybody was masked. And then you have
100%.
babies and toddlers who don't see what mom's doing, like
Yeah.
what are these kids?
Well, and they don't know what their friends are doing.
Yeah,
You see these little 3-year-old, 2-year-olds, and they're all like masked up, and yeah,
yeah.
it is a huge social and brain inhibition.
Yes. Mm. My son was 3.5 when they did the mask thing. Thankfully, I homeschooled him, but I refused to wear a mask, and it was an innate feeling that I didn't want to hide my face from him, and I couldn't explain it to you then. But in retrospect, I, I mean, I stand where I stood then, and it
Hmm.
it just seems completely unnatural to hide yourself. How can your child understand cues of danger if they see you stressed, or I mean, not stressed, but afraid? Like
Yeah,
they need to see that you are their senses. You're what's making sense of the world for them, and it's just so so important. Um,
100%.
yeah. So, as we move into chapter 6, the core complaint are just the words that are used to describe worries and struggles. You're really looking for words that have the strongest emotional resonance. And, like you said, when you work with people, you go, oh, that's it. There it is. You're looking for those words. And there's some examples here. But you can use those words and turn them into a family history question like, okay, so you had claustrophobia. Who in your family? There's that word claustrophobia. Let's see if we can find that up the genogram. And again, ages that repeat, it could happen at a certain age. It could be certain events that cause the trigger or that trigger the response. And then emotions that repeat, body language. And then what are core descriptors? So these are the adjectives and phrases that we're not rationalizing. It's just kind of what comes out, right? Like, and this is in the book, he noted that this is only applicable for biological mother and father. That's a question I have for him. I don't understand. But the adjectives that take you back, why are these important? They're the adjectives that take us back into the feeling states and the images that accompany them when we were small, which prevent us from moving forward. So here's a visual of emotional charge here. When you're using words, anger and numbness, usually once you peel through that, you find sadness and pain. And that's, you have to go through the layers of feelings. You can't ignore what's underneath the anger. And usually, I mean, that's what I've read is usually there is sadness or grief beyond anger. Once you can kind of, and a lot of the words are angry, like when we think about parents and situations that we didn't desire, a lot of those core descriptors come out kind of angry. But then when you deal with the anger, you have the grief left. So how do we use all these words to help ourselves? We need a sentence. So the sentence answers the following. My worst fear, the worst thing that could happen to me is, and then when you take the time to kind of dive into that thought, you're starting a process of self-discovery. Have you ever even thought that? Like, have you ever asked yourself, what is my worst fear? Some people go through their whole lives and never spend time with that thought. But if you can identify something that would fill in that blank, you could start to work on it. That acknowledgement piece is so huge. And once you can fill in the blank, you want to fine tune it. So here's an example. I'd be alone forever and no one would need me. That's my worst fear. Be alone forever. All right. What's even worse than that? Well, that no one would take care of me when I'm old and that I wouldn't matter. It's kind of the same thing, but it's a layer deeper. And then if we take that one even another layer deeper, you get to I'd never be or never have been good enough for anyone. So start with I'd be alone forever, and then you arrive with the true feeling of it's really that I would have never been good enough for anyone. So you find the worst thing that's happened to you. If you can't do that, what do you think is the worst thing that's happened to someone else? And maybe that's just you relating with them because that you empathize with that. And then, or if you can't do that, maybe there's a movie or a book, you empathize deeply with that. And then you ask, who does that fear belong to truly? I love the genogram. I'm a visual person, like I love this. And I don't know if anybody's had time to do it, but I started on mine and I'm calling my dad. He's going to help me walk through some answers on this side. But you don't need to include cousins, nieces, or nephew. What do you think about that, Dr. Mackoff?
I think it's super interesting. I think it's great if you have a family who's willing to talk about that
Yeah.
stuff. Not all of us do.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of like to will acknowledge some of the big traumas, like, oh, they went to war, or this, this happened, and but like the miscarriages, the abuses, the alcoholism, the not everyone wants to admit in their family, depending on the family. Uh,
Right.
so, but I think this map is invaluable if you can do it.
And
So
I think about how I could provide it to my child,
yeah,
right? And because how great would it be if my mom or my dad handed me this, right?
yeah,
If that's something you could bequeath into every generation so everybody knows. I think about the ones who have been adopted or, surrogate children or people who this is a little more complicated for. But any information is better than not having it. So, yeah, genogram, if you can look through chapter 9 for the directions on creating that genogram. And then we move into the last part of the book where we take the complaint, the descriptors, the sentence, and the trauma, and we integrate. So there's a recap of what they all are, but the work starts with you creating healing sentences, and this goes back to visualization. Healing sentences to start taking a conscious action that acknowledges the tragic events of your family's past and the people involved. There's a great list of healing sentences on pages 148 and 149. I mean, they sound like, where the instead of reliving what happened to you, I promise to live my life fully. Or another one is, I'll light a candle for you. It doesn't have to be complicated, just healing sentences. So check out that list if you need some ideas. They help us access all memories, not just the negative ones. So we didn't get into negativity bias yet, but we tend to remember the negative things because they help us survive, right? Like the mice, they remembered that shock and the smell associated with it because they didn't want to be injured by the electricity. So you remember things that harm you so that you can prevent it from happening again in the heightened state of your nervous system during the experience. But healing comes when you can start integrating positive memories. It's what I took from this and found to be effective in my own case. What memories are missing? How can I understand what was behind mom's hurtfulness? What traumatic event lay behind dad's frustration? So starting to flip from blaming to understanding happening within the self. And then another part of this was being able to connect if you feel it anywhere in your body. And you mentioned certain muscles too. So where do you feel the sentence when you say it out loud? And you're like, where do you feel it in your body? Do you want to grab your diaphragm? Do you feel it in your head? Notice where your body's reacting. And then back to visualization as a tool for integrating all these language approaches, healing areas of the brain that are associated with positive emotions and well-being creates new neural pathways. Okay, the last 3 chapters are specific. The core language of separation talks about all different kinds of separation and why it's critical. It causes lifelong urges. You just hit on that. It can create expectations of a partner that aren't really fair to the partner or authentic, or it can make someone clingy or push somebody away. Here are types of separation and how they can occur in the family line. We see these everywhere. These are normal things, right? People work. I mean, like think about all the kids who, dad's gone on a work trip, and we talked about the loss of mother's attention. So there's so many types of separation that can occur, and they have a huge lasting impact on how we live our whole life. What do we need to do? We need to go back to the healing sentences and figure out which memories are missing and start to do some visualization techniques to interrupt the patterns, and try to start remembering the good parts. And then chapter 12 talks about relationships, which I feel like this could be a call all by itself because people within their relationships don't realize the impact that generational trauma is having on the relationship of the present. So do you see a lot of that in your work? Do a lot of people come to you with marriage issues or do you see it heal when they've started addressing?
Yeah, I mean, I've treated sometimes some couples, like
Yeah.
again, if one of the couple is a patient client or whatever, and they want to work with their partner, again, I see if that partner is ready, willing, able, and eager to
Yes.
do it, not just coming in to get credit, not just coming in to look good or whatever. Um, so if they're both really open and really not ready just to blame each other,
Yeah.
They actually want to, whether just be better people by the end, even if they separate,
Mhm.
or better and having a better relationship, and they're willing to do either way. Uh,
Right.
then I sometimes see them together. And so, which is different than treating people individually because it's a whole different energy.
Yeah.
What someone comes up with when they are with their partner is different than when they would come up with when they are by themselves. And then having their partner hear some of where a emotional trigger comes from when they thought it was them that might have been triggering and realize it came from an earlier time and they're like, oh, that makes sense. It
Yeah.
wasn't me, and so it allows a development of communication. It allows a development of awareness and empathy and so it can really make a deeper relationship for the people who are willing. uh, but people who just want to say their side,
Hmm.
uh, that's not really healing.
Hmm.
But it's also some of that's coming from their lack of ever feeling validated.
Right.
So
There's more to uncover.
yes, there's a lot to uncover.
It's just layer upon layer. But really, I mean, we have to consider what's been inherited when we look at our own relationships because they're playing such a big role in those underlying programs of who we are, our insecurities, our like what you just said, like the need to feel validated, the break in the bond with the mother, all these things are still active in us no matter how old we are until we start acknowledging them. And that's, I mean, have you found that people attract or choose mates that trigger those wounds? Like, are we choosing people because their trauma kind of relates with our trauma and it complements it in a way, or it satisfies the need for that, like,
Yeah, I mean it either continues our trauma,
yes.
you know, in different ways. It can either complement our trauma. It could be our uh, trauma again in our face to challenge us whether we're going to heal it or not. It can be uh, what we think we want versus what really we need.
Yeah.
Um, there's so many again layers to it. A lot of it comes from the unhealed wounds that we have from sometimes not just ourselves and our family generations, but also sometimes our environment. The home itself is almost a family member
Mhm.
in our family web. So if you see the home as it and the home environment and whatever level of trauma the home has, the home environment it's its own uh, entity of sorts.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. Do you
yeah.
do you also find that when people have started to be willing to do the deeper work, if one person heals a layer or two or more, and then the other person in the relationship is the same that they have been the whole time, do you see people kind of the person who's done the work kind of figures out what they need versus having to stay with someone who's complementing their traumas? Is that a try to
So
ask?
yeah. So usually if someone's really doing their healing work and they're married to or with a partner who doesn't want to, refuses to, doesn't think they need to, or whatever, it's going to create increased tension and increased separation from each other and increased resentment, at least, especially uh, from the person who refuses to grow. Um, and probably sometimes resentment from the person who is growing that the other person chooses not to.
Right.
And so it a lot of times leads to either being roommates versus partners, um, or a separation in in their partnership, because it's like someone has to make the choice sometimes, and not everyone wants to. But it's, do we stay in a place that makes us miserable or makes us feel not enough, or holds us back and feel that we are uh, being punished for growing and punished for wanting more out of our life,
Yeah.
and it becomes a very unhealthy relationship. And it's again, can we transform out of this relationship without blame, um, and depending on the other person. But it's also, I would say, even in that situation, we have to heal why we picked that person in the first place.
Yeah.
What did they fill in our life? Why did
Right.
we?
Right. What's interesting to think, if you're doing work and it causes resentment or separation, where you're just roommates, um, that your intention is to do the work to heal the family line, but at the same time, you're causing some
Well,
trauma.
don't, I wouldn't think it, I wouldn't think of it as you're causing.
Okay.
It's like if you're raising your vibration of being, your vibration of level of consciousness, your vibration of where your body, mind, and spirit are in a healing state,
Mm.
you are going to create discomfort in people who are not vibrating at that
Right.
uh, level. So those people are going to start to fall away from your life in some way, because that discomfort is something that they don't want, and you aren't supposed to be at that lower vibration. So it's almost like a universal law of sorts, to like attracts like and can
Right.
repel the opposite.
Right.
So it's almost you're growing out of a relationship,
Yeah.
and it's not a fault. It is, it
Right.
just
I think about sometimes like how there are children in marriages of what like a marriage you described, right? Somebody who they feel like they're roommates, and then maybe one person has done the work, and maybe one person just wants to be who they are, and then the child is kind of like, well, there's this rift now, and so like, does that, that starts to impact the next generation?
100%, but there's also the potential of that child learning how to do work early.
Oh, I
And
like that spin.
so, and if that child does work early and knows how to self-soothe, and is willing to work through their emotional stuff and realize what's not theirs, and so even if you have that, you will even call it a toxic partner versus just
Yeah.
a non of someone who just
Right.
doesn't care one way or the other. They just don't want to do work and they don't blame you or whatever, but there are those too. But we'll just say there's that toxic person. Well, if you're helping the child and being supportive of the child to feel what they're feeling and come to realizations, and you don't have to insult the other partner,
Yeah.
focus on the child and what they're feeling, and validate their feelings and help them with their growth, and help them so they get into a pattern of realizing I don't have to just sit in these emotions. I don't have to
Mhm.
just take on blame or shame that's not mine. Then it gives that child a foundation of healing, growth, not
Mhm.
taking other people's stuff on. That
Yeah.
makes sense. It's like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to just be that they are victim to
Yeah.
everything,
Right.
you
Right.
know.
Well, that's yes. Okay. Thank you for putting it that way. I actually had a person who does what's it called? MNRI. It's some type of reflex. She was working on my son, and she said, when sometimes when I'm working on kids and the kids don't improve, it's because I should be working on the parents. And the
100%.
I mean, it's really profound. And
I,
so,
I
couple that with what you just said, it's like, wow, that's
Well,
all
yeah,
the parenting tools you need.
I, I've I have called out parents and like that they're so worried about their child,
Mhm.
but certain things they need to get treated first for the child to get better.
Yeah.
I have one patient currently child and intestinal stuff or whatever, and her mother's like has so much worry. I'm like, how
Mhm.
much is the child's intestinal stuff? The
Mhm.
mother's worry. And
Mhm.
I keep telling the mother, we have to work on your panic stuff to
Mhm.
help the child get better. I know, but can we just, and I was like,
Oh,
and they don't want to fully acknowledge for themselves. I even had a girl some years ago, she's out of college now, but when she was in high school, parents divorced, father was bringing her in. Then one time the father couldn't bring her in, the mother brought her in, and she was playing volleyball or whatever. And both of the parents, I realized, were just not super stable. But at least the father wanted her to be better and get the best. The mother brought her in, and she had a ankle injury on her left side, and left side's feminine. And tried various things to help her ankle hold after that sprain. Doing some quantum neurology, that wasn't holding. Did check some of her emotions, it wasn't holding. I was like, Mom, would you mind holding these points on your forehead for a second, which are some certain emotional points? And then the kid's ankle just strengthened up. And so
that's
it's like,
amazing.
and that was the last time the mother was willing to take her in to see me. Um,
I would be the opposite. That's
yes,
like
but
what
but but
else?
that's someone who's willing to deal with their stuff and someone who
Yeah.
wants to stay a victim, wants to. Uh,
Yeah.
but that's how big a connection that sometimes
Truly.
why the parents have them helping themselves. Also happens with dogs. Sometimes the
Dogs.
dog stuff is from picking up their owner's stuff,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
and the owners are getting treated. Sometimes the dog gets better. Um,
That's amazing.
yeah, so
Yeah, my cat and me. I'll chat with you later on that one. My cat does some of the things I do. I'm like, how do you even know how to do
yeah, cats are a little alien, but they probably
this? This is great. Our kids are little extensions of ourselves. Like they grew inside of us. We were attached to the umbilical cord, and just because we're separate now doesn't mean that we can't hold points here and affect them where they are. You
yeah,
know, it's
which then also
powerful.
means to treat whatever this is, but
Yeah, that's so amazing. I love that. I live for that. Okay. The one of the last chapters was the core language of success, and that's, how successful are you? Examine the language of around fears of failure and fears of success, right? Like, do I allow myself to be successful? Do I feel doomed to failure? Am I just never good enough? Unresolved trauma can hinder how success flows to us, how we receive it. So I can imagine that working through some of these things can be really good for your business if you're willing to. I love the example of the guy who had the orange grove that he inherited from his grandfather, and then he did some deeper work where he kind of empathized with the laborers of his childhood on that grove, and then he was able to be more prosperous in his own business because he was holding on to that fear from long ago in terms of business. And so it doesn't just affect our relationships with one another, it affects our business because that's an extension of our energy. Rejecting a parent can impede your success. And yeah, again, we see the break in the bond with mother, leading to fear and distrust. We probably need to have a call to break the bond with mother. Um, do you have anything you want to say about inherited trauma and success in business or?
um, I would say, well, reading that section brought up a lot of, oh yeah, I got that, I got that, I got that.
Okay.
But I would say again,
How the heck?
the ability to feel safe, ability to feel nourished and nurtured and deserving of being nurtured and nourished, the ability to feel deserving of resources.
Mm,
These all go with success.
mm,
And so if you are breaking the bond, or have a bond broken with mother, this could indelibly affect your success. If you are made to feel undeserving and unworthy of resources by either parent or family, or made to feel shameful, or if you get something and somebody else doesn't and you're made to feel shame over it, or you see your parents feeling shamed over that, that in itself can affect your success. And so these little things that you may think weren't that big a deal back then, um, you know, it can have a lasting impact. So then you can go generational, because that's just what's modeled in the present thing. Then if you
right.
go generational and see, I found somebody with, again, Jewish in Germany, or Poland, um, who couldn't be too successful, because that might bring too much attention. And then that attention might not allow them to survive well.
Wow.
There was also one who, um, again, during that time period, where actually, I think I found that in Spanish Inquisition. Um, but where Jewish person being in debt were more likely to survive versus someone being in debt to them.
Oh my gosh.
Because
Wow. That's huge.
someone being in debt to them, their debt goes away if they like turn that person in.
Whoa.
Um, but if someone's in debt to them and they want their money at some point, that person's more likely to survive, uh, to get that payout.
Wow.
Unless so yeah, so that goes some ancestral, uh, examples of success as well. So
Wow. Um, so your work has turned you into a history buff.
it shows up every once in a while. I have to go look up something, but yeah.
That's pretty cool. I think we should write a history book based on your experiences. Um, okay, to wrap it up, core language medicine. Core language is medicine because it disentangles us from the web of inherited fear. When we start putting words on things, we can start acknowledging them. We change the unconscious mantra rooted in suffering to a resource that can set us free. For example, I started seeing so when I was 5, my dad and my mom split and my dad moved away. He wasn't not in my life. I saw him every other weekend, but as a 5-year-old, I experienced it as my dad left. And so the unconscious mantra was, I'm just not good enough, right? I'm not good enough for him to stay. But you can take that suffering if you know the words and you can turn it in to healing, right? Is it true? Ask yourself, is it true? Was I not good enough or am I good enough? It's just that that wasn't the answer to the problem. So if I don't know the words to associate with that program that's running, it's going to keep running because it's still trying to fix the problem from decades before. But if I can put the words with it, acknowledge it, rationalize it in a way, it can release. So core language is your medicine. Visualization is your medicine. Take action by changing your brain. Um, and then there are some tips for when you become aware of these triggers. So what do you think, Doc? Do you think doing the work once is enough for people, or do you think you do the work, you make some progress, and then a little time passes and then it might come up again? So you kind of have to have a plan.
Yeah, I rarely see except on certain weird circumstances, like a one hit. It's like,
Okay.
the thing with the person waking up freezing,
Mm,
you find that connection that's so unique and then that resolves that symptomatology. Okay, that's like a one hit wonder sort of.
okay, yeah, yeah.
Okay. But separation and breaking bonds and
Mm,
some of these other things, uh, they take, multiple uh, types of sessions to really shift, to really hold, because there's so many different aspects of our lives that some of these affect. And
yeah,
to think one
yeah.
session is going to correct all of those, it doesn't happen that way. But if you like start as a child and
Yeah,
learn certain tools, maybe that would be a different situation. But as adults, we've had so many things built on itself.
right,
Uh, doesn't mean we can't have a shift in one session that makes a
right,
difference,
right.
but is that the end of something? Usually not. And the question is, are we trying to just get rid of a symptom? And it's okay if that's what certain people just want. I mean, if they have anxiety, can we just get rid of some of the anxiety? Still,
Mm-hmm,
it might take multiple sessions because different things may trigger their anxiety. They might be
mm-hmm,
so disconnected from their feelings, as well as made to feel that they don't have a right to feel, or um, that you can't blame somebody else, so they can't bring up an acknowledgement of somebody else causing something. So they don't allow that sight, and becomes anxiety.
mm,
But if we're on a healing journey, a life journey of healing, there's going to be many sessions likely. Just they might be more spread out. They might just be, you might, during a certain trauma aspect, there might be a few sessions, and then you can space them out some more. And just if you want to keep growing and keep doing, that's some other people's goals of to continue to heal and grow. Then
right,
it might be a lifelong relationship with somebody
mm-hmm,
helping,
right,
but not to the same
right.
frequency as someone who's actually going through a trauma, going through something significant in a more intense time. So
Right. So like somebody who's overweight and they want to lose weight. So they start eating meat and vegetables and they cut out all the stuff that's bad. And then they lose the weight. And then they go, oh, I lost the weight. And then I guess I can start eating all the stuff that's bad again because I lost the weight. That's not how it works.
it's not
So
how it works, as well as they never ask themselves the why,
the why, right?
and the why isn't always obvious. you know, the why is like, okay, does someone who loves himself and respects himself eat that way that they had to change? So, and if they were abused or sexually abused, and they feel they need that distance from people, that armor, uh,
Yeah,
did they address that? If they are feeling like they have to carry the weight of their family, or their parents, did they address that? And if they're just trying to lose weight, they usually find it again. It's
right. Yeah, exactly. That's what's in focus is the
so
weight.
yeah,
Yeah.
versus losing the heaviness, whatever
Mm,
the
yeah,
heaviness means.
that's good.
So,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of, yeah. So
But that's a great analogy for our emotional work too. I mean,
yeah,
you're not going to lose it by doing a session and then just going back to life. It's not a magic eraser. You have to ask the whys and you have to be willing to integrate it in every facet of your world for it to stick.
yeah.
It's daunting.
It's daunting, but it's like, can we get away from the judgment?
Yes.
Because it's like, movement and exercise in certain ways is like you're just continually to train your body to live a better life and to be able to handle the stress of life,
Right.
the physical stresses of life, and then doing the emotional work, continuously working through this stuff isn't, you know, not that you can't take breaks, but it is allowing you to handle the stress of life and mental life and to be able to grow to handle more to so that you don't get as triggered, that you don't get as um, thrown off your
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. I tend to think of the pottery wheel. You put the clay on the wheel and it spins, and you put one finger in there for just a second, and it changes the shape of the whole thing because it's all that spinning motion. Everything is connected. And so when we make one little change, we can change the shape of it. We
Hmm.
can make it grow taller, we can expand it out, we can put designs and divots into it. And that's what we're doing with our life. It's not a matter of just making a poke on a wheel that's not spinning. Life is going to keep happening. And so that snowball, right? Like, how are we tailoring our everyday experiences with active, um, just active effort, right? We have to be
Hmm.
present. We have to think of these things regularly if we're expecting anything to change. Can't sit back, take a pill,
Yeah.
you know, although some people take their methylene blue. I'm just kidding. I'm not knocking on methylene blue. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. I, I I don't know much about it. I know a little bit about it. It's not something that I'm attracted to.
Yeah.
Uh, so
You know, me neither. I've seen the blue brain pictures and I'm just like,
yeah,
that's not something I think I need. Um,
no,
that's that's all I wrote.
I think that's
And
great.
if you thanks, guys
Great
have
job.
anything, I feel like this conversation could be at least 5 parts more. This could be a series,
Yeah,
because there's just so many
facets.
pockets of every little subject. And it's fun talking with you about it because you have practical experience and you have a great mind for these things. And it's really fun. It's fun for me.
Thank you. Fun for me.
So, biggest takeaways to wrap it up, I think I would say the book is about how suffering and broken emotional patterns are linked through epigenetic expressions in our ancestral line, and how changing your own perspective can end the cycle. Um, Most of the answers are right inside of your heart. You don't have to travel to Asia and train with expensive gurus. And I think the biggest questions that most people want to answer when they read a book like this is how do we identify the cycle? And how do we know what we're carrying? How do we know? We're not even used to asking ourselves that question. How do we know what we're carrying that's not ours? How do I distinguish what's not mine? How can I know if it's okay to let something go? Where do I even start? So, if you have anything to say about that, we could wrap it up with that.
I would say because sometimes there is a lack of awareness, and when I say a lack of awareness, it isn't like a judgment lack of awareness. It is
Yeah.
you know, someone not ever having modeled someone having awareness, and and not being around people who show some self-awareness. So I would say some of the things is, okay, what patterns in my life repeat that don't feel good to me? What patterns in my life do I
That's
keep
good.
making a similar choice and I don't know why? So these are like some of the questions like, okay, why do we keep doing X, Y, Z when it's not
Mm,
really feeling good or beneficial?
right,
So then that brings up the where did this come from,
right.
right?
Because
And
why
that
would
can
you?
go from childhood, but then it could also go
Okay.
prior sometimes. So
That's good. That's good advice. So start looking around and in your own experience and figure out the things that are repeating that you don't necessarily prefer to be happening.
Hmm.
Then
And
jump
they
in.
well, and that some of the repeatings can be behaviors.
Okay.
Some of the repeatings can be things in life. Some of
Okay.
the repeatings can be the people in your life.
Hmm.
And the other thing is when I help people with healing certain things, especially in relationships,
Yeah.
um, it's to not focus on the one individual because they're part of a pattern.
Okay.
If you only fix that one individual, the pattern they're part of
Mm.
usually still repeats. You're like, I'm not going to date that person anymore. It's like, okay. Then you bring someone up who's a little different, but
Right.
still the same. And it's
Right.
because you didn't treat the pattern, you didn't treat the whole thing. Um, so it is, again, allowing yourself to see your patterns of behavior, patterns of what you do, how you do, as well as the hardest part is sometimes seeing what we do that's not
Yeah.
beneficial to others or ourselves.
Right.
You know,
Right.
you're like, we're easy to say, well, they did that to me or they
Hmm.
treated me that way. But we also sometimes have to say, oh, I treated them that way. Why did I do that?
Hmm.
Why did I react that way?
Hmm.
And so those are sometimes the harder things to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. That seems honestly like it would be the most effective work you can do because that really does.
That's some of the big deep work. It's not the easy work, but it is,
No. Right.
know,
Yeah, and they qualify as patterns that repeat that you don't favor, right? Like when you
yes,
say what patterns repeat that don't feel good. Well, I tend to nag people all the time and then they
yeah,
leave me.
yeah,
Well, let's look at that.
yeah.
Why
And then you
nag?
have to say, why did I just use nag?
Right, right,
Is that yours?
right.
Um,
That's
you
the hard work. It's looking at it in the mirror. Wow, bringing it all right back to the self.
know? Yes.
Truly. Well, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for exploring all these. I mean, I can't wait to do a session with you soon, um, and see what comes up personally, but also in terms of how I think it's always so fascinating to use yourself as an experiment when you're
Mhm.
learning tools because
Oh
you
yeah.
learn that work. And then you can start picking it up on other people better and seeing, oh, I can see that. Oh, I noticed you said this word, or, like organ connections and things like that. And I get in my practice, I see I've actually had mother-daughter pairs come for thermal imaging, and it's amazing how you can actually spot similarities in people who are related in their thermal patterns, even though they live in two separate bodies, do different
Oh,
things. It's really incredible. So,
so
yeah.
so you just brought up an idea, but
Oh,
it's like
yeah. Let's hear it.
treat, treating the daughter's emotions while doing the thermal imaging of the mother, or
Oh,
vice versa.
wow. Yes.
Or vice versa,
Oh,
and
gosh.
see if that actually shifts some of the thermal imaging. So,
Man, Doc, we need to make that happen.
yeah,
Let's do it.
all right,
For
make it
science.
happen.
Let's do, wow, that's amazing. And then if she gets pregnant, no, I'm just kidding. Well, I
Yeah,
just thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for answering all my questions and for sharing so much wonderful insight. And I want to make sure people can get in touch with you. So when I send a recap out to all my members who couldn't make it, um, what's the best way to reach out to you?
I think the easiest is at my website. You can connect through email, uh,
Okay,
and it's like the contact me on my website.
okay,
So I put it in the chat,
okay,
www.drjohnmackoff.com.
okay. And I will make sure I type that also in the follow-up email, but that's your site. Email's good. And obviously you post a lot of good things on Instagram, and I really appreciate your time on Instagram where you answer questions because you field questions very regularly from all topics.
Yes.
And that's really helpful, even just as a learner. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and if you guys don't follow Dr. Mackoff on IG, make sure you do because it's really helpful. And we'll talk more tomorrow. We're going to talk with the author. So if you can join, please do. And we're going to ask questions of him. It'll be another perspective of all this work. And I think we can all learn a lot. But thank you so much, Dr. Mackoff, for joining us.
Well, thanks for having this. This is fun.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. And like I said, I'll send out the recap. So I'll look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. And thanks for spending your time with me.
All
I'm gonna
right.
stop sharing my screen and end the recording, but I really do appreciate it. Well, cancel. Okay, stop recording. I think it stopped. Pause recording.